Hey, back to being in time. So we're up to Division 1, Chapter 4, being in the world as being with and being a self, the they. So what we're looking at here essentially is our being with others, another facet of the being of Dasein. And what Heidegger's looking to answer here is the existential question: who is Dasein? How do we experience ourselves? And the important thing to focus on in this chapter is the fact that we're not alone. We are in a world full of other beings like us, other Daseins. But these other beings, they don't show up for us like useful things, like things that are ready to hand. Rather, they appear as being with me in the world. So the world is always one that I share with these others. And this way of being is called Mit-Dasein, or Dasein with. So the Dasein with of others can be encountered in two ways. The first is through inner worldly things at hand, which point to other Daseins in some way. So this is, I talked about this in a lot more detail with my video series about being and nothingness, Sartre. And Sartre talks about how things, objects, normally they exist in my world for me. They make up a totality which is directed towards me, but then when someone else, when another human, another for itself in Sartrean terminology, when another for itself shows up, another person, all those things suddenly have another reference point. This other person. So the other person kind of becomes a new focal point around which all the things become focused, become directed. Around which they all become oriented, and that's kind of what Heidegger's talking about here. Inner worldly things at hand, just objects in the world, they all point to these other Daseins. And when we encounter another Dasein in that way, we essentially encounter them as nothing more than objectively present thing persons, is what Heidegger says. And so we just encounter others as things in the just objectively present things, just like a table, a chair, a Dasein. So that's one way that we can encounter others in this Mit-Dasein, and the other way is through meeting them at work, which is to say, in their being in the world. So this is where they are engaged in projects where they're actively engaged in the world in the same way that I am as a Dasein. So when we apprehend others in this way, they become what Heidegger says thematic in their Dasein. So we don't see them as just objectively present things anymore. We see them as Daseins. So he stresses that this is not the case of an inner subject looking out on an outer object like itself. Others are not everyone but me. They are those among whom one also is. And it's this first. So the world is always already the one that I share with others. And this is a continuation of a theme that's running through being and time. There is no he's trying to break away from this Cartesian way of thinking where there's this independent subject agent looking out at the world, and that subject comes first, and then the things out in the world kind of are added on to the experience of the subject. So Heidegger's saying it's not like that at all. Rather, we're not kind of aware of ourselves first and then other people. Those other people are always already part of our being, part of our world, part of our way of being, and that way of being is this Mit-Dasein, this Dasein with, this being with others. And even being alone doesn't change the fact that Dasein is Dasein with, Mit-Dasein. Being alone is what Heidegger calls a deficient mode of being with, and could never even be a possibility for Dasein if it wasn't grounded in the ontological being with. So that's interesting, and Sartre says something identical. Actually, he has the exact same thing, comment to make about this. But even when we're alone, kind of physically, no one else is around, that doesn't change your way of being in the world. It doesn't change your being, which is fundamentally being with. So it's for Heidegger, that is it's the fundamental way Dasein engages with the world. It's always already Mit-Dasein. And then if we happen to be alone physically, well, it doesn't change our being. It's just a deficient mode of being with. It's a way of being with in which we are being with no one, if you like. So that's always that's always the starting point, this Mit-Dasein, being with. And if you think about it, so I was thinking about this, what if, say, everybody dies? There's some kind of virus or something, and I'm the only person who's immune to it on the planet. Everybody else dies, so I'm totally alone, truly alone. Even so, that's still a deficient mode. My original mode of being was still being with. Even if I'm alone for the rest of my life, my original mode of being in the world was this Mit-Dasein, was being surrounded by people, engaging with these others who are like me, other Daseins. And even when they're removed from my experience forever, that doesn't change that fundamental aspect, that fundamental aspect of my being. And so what if then, so I just kept the idea running. What if everybody dies right after I was born and somehow I survived? So I never actually experienced life with others. Right from the beginning I was alone, and somehow I managed to survive into adulthood. Does that affect my being with? Am I still Mit-Dasein? And living my life in this deficient mode of being with? And I think yes, because even though I've never experienced other people, there was still that world into which I came and from which I began. Without a world of other Daseins, I could never have been born in the first place. So even if I never got to experience another person's, I never got to experience life with anyone else, I still came from that. I came from a rich history full of social interactions and cultural values and societal norms, a civilization, a society. I still came from such a place, and so that being, part of my being, is still that Mit-Dasein. And then what if, however, it's only me from the very beginning? From there were never any humans. There was never any other Dasein, and somehow I just came into being. So I wasn't born to human parents, to Dasein parents, and so I didn't come from any kind of society, any kind of collective. There was never any other Daseins to be with. What if I just appeared one day and I was alone? There was no one else. Do I still have that Mit-Dasein? Have we found a loophole in Heidegger's thought? And then I would think maybe I'm not Mit-Dasein anymore, but I'm not Dasein either. If that was how I came into being, just some inexplicable fashion, I just popped into being without any kind of background society from which I could have entered the world. I think we're talking about something that's completely alien to human life, human existence. So I may not be Mit-Dasein, but I wouldn't even be Dasein in the first place. So no matter how far back we go, no matter how we try and turn this around, I think Heidegger's onto something here. A part of our being is being with others, Mit-Dasein. So being with is characterized not by taking care, but by concern or solicitude. That's the term that Heidegger uses. And there are two modes of concern. One is taking away care, and the other is giving back care. So taking away care is, Heidegger describes as a leap in for the other, so that the other becomes dependent. So you're kind of taking away the other's abilities to be a Dasein, to be a responsible, acting, a responsible Dasein, acting and engaging in the world. So that's that taking away care, and giving back care is a leap ahead of the other, and this is helping him or her to own their own care, it's helping them to help them kind of grow into their Dasein, if you like, their Daseinhood. So that's being with others, and Heidegger also touches on what's being called the problem of other minds here, and the problem of other minds is just the idea how we can know for sure that there are other consciousnesses, that other people are in fact conscious like me, that other people do have a mind similar to me. They're not just robots, say, for example. And it's generally thought, or this is what Heidegger describes, and he's talking about Husserl, I think, with this. It's thought we can know other people exist by inference. So I know how I am. I know I have this inner light of consciousness, if you like. I know I am conscious, and I know what my own behaviors and the way I talk. And so when I see this in other people, when I see the same kinds of behaviors, when they respond in ways that I would respond as well, then I can infer that they're also conscious, that they also have minds like me. And Heidegger calls this empathy, and it was something that Husserl, an idea that Husserl pushed as well. But Heidegger rejects this. He thinks empathy is not a primordial kind of being. Empathy is like being alone, grounded on being with. So he's still sticking to his guns here, that being with is the fundamental is a fundamental part of Dasein's being. And empathy, say that the idea to infer from my own behaviors and actions and words, to infer from that other people who act in the same way, who say the same things, who respond in a similar fashion, they're also like me. That is already grounded on this idea of Mit-Dasein, being with, and Dasein with. And if we didn't have that in the first place, empathy just wouldn't even make sense. So that's kind of a cool way of I guess, dissolving the problem a little bit. The problem of other minds isn't really so much of a problem, because Dasein already in its very being is this Dasein with. So we don't kind of need to prove that others exist, because in formulating the question, we've already found ourselves in a world with them. So there's it's kind of cool. I kind of like that approach. There is no Dasein without other Daseins, and so there's no need to prove that they exist, because if they didn't, you wouldn't either. And then he goes on to talk about the they, das Man, which is translated as the they, and it sounds a little bit sinister. The they, kind of this anonymous, unknowable entity kind of lurking somewhere, and it's probably not really that kind of that's probably not the best way to think about it. But the they is just it's like a kind of group consciousness or public consensus. It's the social norms that kind of the social norms or conventions that we all live by, and that really allow us to have functioning societies. But the they is that's Heidegger's way of talking about it, as if there is this group of people, anonymous group of people, kind of dictating to us how we ought to behave, and so we all behave the way that they tell us to, or the way that they do. We say things that they say. We do things that they do, and they is this fictitious. Of course, there isn't any cabal kind of pulling the strings, and we're all dancing to their tune. It's just, this is just the way that societies work. There is this, there are these conventions and norms and mores that we all follow without even thinking about. And like I say, that's what allows societies to exist in the first place. So anyway, that's the they, and in being with, in this Mit-Dasein, there is constant care given to the way that one differs from others, from other people, from other Daseins, even though the extent of this concern is unknown to the individual person. So even though Heidegger's saying that just being Mit-Dasein means that we're automatically we compare ourselves to others, to other Daseins, even though we don't realize we're doing it. That's just a part of being mit-Dasein. And this kind of comparing ourselves with others and noticing when we're not kind of in sync or not following with others, that is what Heidegger calls distentiality. That constant care taken over the way that one doesn't fit in, one differs from other people in society. So in everyday being with one another, distentiality takes the form of subservience to others. The everyday possibilities of being of Dasein are at the disposal of the whims of others. And this is exactly what I was just saying before. We enjoy ourselves the way they enjoy themselves. We hold opinions that they hold. And so we originally in our everyday kind of primary engagement as a Dasein, we are subservient to to these mores and customs that other people have decided for us, and an immediate consequence of this adoption of what Heidegger calls the they self. So when you're in this subservient mode, Heidegger says that this is you as a they self. When you have taken on this they self, each individual Dasein is then anonymous. So there's no individuality, and that is going to be something that Heidegger will resist quite strongly later on. And the example he gives is a newspaper, which a newspaper can be read by anyone. It's not written for a specific person. It's just kind of mass-produced, meant to be consumed by all people. So it's completely anonymous in its readership, in its market, if you like, and all readers are just kind of taken to be the same. We're not worrying about focusing on any particular one person who's reading it. It's just a mass-produced thing. Everybody gets the same thing. We imagine everybody's the same. There's this anonymous quality, and that's just one of the what is going to be an undesirable consequence of this they self. So there are three ways of being of the they, which Heidegger calls publicness. So when we're in this as this they self, the first thing is distentiality, which we've already seen as an awareness of and a comparing of Dasein to others, to other Daseins. There's also an averageness, which is an ensuring that no individual Dasein breaks the norm. So making sure that everybody's kind of following the rules, if you like. That's another way of being of the they, another way of being in publicness. Distentiality, averageness, and also leveling down. And leveling down is a restriction of the possibilities of being of Dasein imposed by its lostness in the they. So it's what we were saying earlier about the being subservient to others. Your goals and your possibilities are always decided in the worst case scenario, but at least influenced by the they, by the norms and values and customs that you were born into. And in addition to these, Heidegger mentions the disburdening of one's being. This is another consequence of publicness. And disburdening of one's being means that the individual Dasein is no longer responsible for its own being. It kind of hands over that responsibility to the they. You don't have to worry about what should you do, because you can just do what they do. You don't have to worry about how you should speak, because you can just speak the way that they speak. And another consequence of this is accommodation, which is the way that the they enables Dasein to take things easily and make them easy. So closely related to that disburdening of one's being, you can just pick up easily anything because everybody is doing the same thing. And if you want to know how to do something, you don't have to think for yourself. You can just follow the crowd. Everything becomes easy. And a little quote I found which kind of encapsulates this idea: everyone is the other and no one is himself. And so that's just, I think, captures this idea of the they and being lost in the they, and taking on a they self instead of being your own self. But, and it gets interesting here, Heidegger says that the they is an existential and belongs as a primordial phenomenon to the positive constitution of Dasein. And then even more strongly, a page later, authentic being a self is not based on an exceptional state of the subject detached from the they, but is an existential modification of the they as an essential existential. So what does that mean? So what Heidegger's saying there is the being lost in the they isn't something you can kind of choose to fall into or choose to avoid. It's not, you're not kind of neutral, and then you decide, am I going to be inauthentic and go with the they become a they self, or will I go with authenticity and become my own Dasein? That's not the way it works, because the they is an existential feature. It's an existential. It's a part of your ontology, your being. It's not something you can choose to do or not do. And it belongs as a primordial phenomenon to the positive constitution of Dasein. So that's, he's kind of trying to say it's not something negative. We shouldn't think of it as something we need to or we can avoid. It's just a part of our core being. It's a part of that Mit-Dasein. Being with is being lost in the they. And the second quote, authentic being a self is not based on an exceptional state of the subject detached from the they. So again, you can never completely detach yourself from the they. You can't escape that, because the they is a part of Mit-Dasein, and you are fundamentally Mit-Dasein. So there's no way of completely detaching yourself from the they. Authentic being a self is an existential modification of the they. And that existential is spelt EXISTENTIELL. If you remember at the very beginning of this video series, I mentioned that existential, that word, and it means it's the understanding by which Dasein comes to terms with the question of existence, always only through ontic existence. So it's connected more with ontic rather than ontology. But it's kind of the way what Heidegger wants to capture with existential, I'm just going to keep pronouncing it like that. I'm sure that's not the way to say it, but to distinguish it from existential, I'm going to call this one existential. And it's just, it's ontic, but it's getting to ontology through the study of our ontic state, our ontic mode of being, if I can say that. So so authentic being itself is an existential modification of the they, which is an essential existential. So it's kind of like you've got the lostness in the they, that's part of you, it's part of Dasein, part of Dasein's being, but you can modify that, you can make, you can how can I say it, you can modify it, it's the best way to say it, you can modify that fundamental part of your being so that it is authentic, so that it is a being, a self, rather than being a they self. But you can't change that they self. That's a part of you, because mit Dasein is a part of you. So that's kind of interesting, because I think it's tempting to see this as being like, well, I mean, I can go either with inauthentic or authentic. But Heidegger's saying, actually, you're already inauthentic, and you're always going to be inauthentic. But you can modify that at an existential, at an ontic level. But you can't change that ontology. You're always going to be connected to this they self. You're always going to be in a world kind of governed by the they. You're always going to be in a world saturated with the they, and you can't escape that. But you can modify your way of being, your mode of being, so that it's not inauthentic, so that you are being a self. So after all of that, what else do I have? These passages mean that being lost in the they is not an existential possibility of Dasein's being with, but the existential grounding for Dasein's being. So that's just what I was saying. Man, I should have just read what I wrote, So Heidegger's clear that this they self is an inauthentic mode of being, but this means that Dasein is primordially, existentially inauthentic in its being with. As the they self, Dasein is dispersed in the they and must first find itself. So Dasein, appearing in a world populated by other beings whose being is the same as mine, also finds itself always already caught up in a complex web of social roles, norms and customs without which it couldn't be. And that is this chapter. That is being with and being a self. And next time we'll move on to chapter 5, and we're starting to get to the end of the first half. And the second half is where it starts to get really tricky. So, cool so far. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.